3 days after helping his new neighbor move a few heavy boxes into her small townhouse in the quiet suburbs of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, Michael Carter opened his front door and froze in absolute disbelief. Police cars filled the street, red and blue lights painting his modest home like a crime scene. Neighbors stared from behind curtains, and standing at the center of it all was the mysterious woman he had helped, her eyes fixed on him with an unreadable expression. In that instant, Michael felt his heart stop as an officer stepped forward and called his name, and what happened next would shock everyone. Just 72 hours earlier, Michael's life had been invisible to the world. A struggling single father, barely holding on after years of silent suffering, he never imagined his simple act of kindness would turn into the most dangerous moment of his life. As the officer's hand slowly moved toward his handcuffs, a chilling thought crossed his mind. Had helping that woman destroyed everything he had left? But he had no idea this was only the beginning. The police radio crackled with coded words he couldn't understand. Yet one thing was terrifyingly clear. He was now the center of an investigation he knew nothing about. The woman stood quiet, silent as stone, offering no explanation, no defense, no warning. His daughter, Lily, watched from the window inside their home, confused and terrified. Michael wanted to scream that he was innocent, but the moment suffocated him, and something far worse was about to unfold. As his neighbors whispered, some pointing with judgment, others with curiosity, Michael realized how fast a reputation could be destroyed in a town where everyone pretended to know everyone. The same people who once smiled at him in the morning now stared as if he were dangerous. And the woman he helped stood protected behind the police, as if she were the victim. At that moment, everything started to change. Inside Michael's chest, fear battled with rage, confusion with heartbreak. He replayed every detail of the day they met, every word she said, every box he lifted, every polite thank you. Nothing made sense. Why was she here? Why were the police here? And why did this feel bigger than just a misunderstanding? What happened next would shock everyone. The officer asked him to step forward slowly. Michael obeyed, his hands trembling, knowing any wrong move could be interpreted as guilt. His daughter screamed from inside the house, and that sound pierced his soul deeper than any accusation ever could. And yet the woman said nothing. Her silence was louder than any lie, and it carried something dark beneath it. In that instant, Michael understood something terrifying. Whatever was happening had started long before that moving day, and unknowingly, he had stepped into a story written far before he ever met her. The kindness he gave freely had become a trigger in a chain of events he never saw coming. As the cuffs hovered inches from his wrists, the woman finally moved her lips, but instead of saving him, she whispered something to the officer that made his expression change completely. Michael saw shock flash in the man's eyes, and that was when Michael realized things were far worse than he imagined. Because at that exact moment, as his daughter cried and his world stood still, Michael discovered that his life had just collided with a secret so big, so dangerous, and so powerful that nothing would ever return to how it was before, and the truth was only beginning to surface. The protagonist's hard routine before that terrifying morning. Michael Carter's life followed a brutal routine of exhaustion and quiet sacrifice. Every day began at 5:10 a.m., long before the sun even considered rising over Cedar Rapids. He prepared breakfast with one hand while packing his daughter Lily's school bag with the other. There were no backup plans, no partner to share the load. Life for him was a continuous sprint between survival and responsibility, and that alone carried a secret weight. Michael worked as a warehouse loader at the edge of town, lifting boxes that mirrored the heaviness he carried inside. His paycheck barely covered rent, utilities, and Lily's school expenses. Some nights, he skipped dinner just to make sure she ate enough. And yet, no one at work knew his real struggle because Michael never complained, but silence has a way of screaming eventually. After work, he picked Lily up from after-school care, always apologizing for being 5 minutes late, always feeling like he was failing in ways no one could see. Homework was done at the kitchen table while he calculated bills beside her. Numbers never added up, and every time the math failed, fear quietly grew stronger. His small house, old and slightly crooked, was everything he could afford. The roof leaked in winter, the walls creaked at night, But to Lily, it was home. And to Michael, it was the last proof that he hadn't completely lost. Still, every unfamiliar sound after midnight made him wonder how fragile their world truly was. Weekends were not rest. They were repair days, fixing broken doors, patching drywall, stretching groceries for one more week. Michael lived in constant calculation mode, measuring every dollar, every minute, every ounce of hope. And yet, despite the constant pressure, he always kept his pain hidden behind a tired smile. Lily never asked for expensive toys. She never complained. And that was what broke him the most. Children were not meant to understand sacrifice, yet she did. Sometimes she would leave a half sandwich on his plate pretending she was full, and Michael would eat it pretending he didn't cry inside. At night, after Lily slept, Michael sat alone in the dark, staring at his phone with bills glowing on the screen. He did not scroll social media. He did not chase dreams anymore. He only survived. And sometimes survival feels heavier than failure itself. Despite everything, kindness still lived inside him. He held doors. He helped elderly neighbors carry groceries. He fixed bicycles for free, because helping others reminded him that he was still human, and that fragile goodness would soon lead him exactly where danger waited. Michael believed that as long as he stayed invisible, trouble would never find him. But fate rarely respects quiet lives. And the very moment he chose to help one stranger in need, his entire routine silently cracked open, and something was already creeping through that opening. Silent pain of the past 5 years earlier. Michael Carter was not alone. He had a wife, a home filled with laughter, and a future that made sense. Her name was Emily. She loved Sunday pancakes, candlelit dinners, and spontaneous road trips. They were young, hopeful, and reckless with dreams. And then one rainy night on Highway 30, everything ended in seconds, and the silence that followed never truly left him. The accident was ruled unavoidable. A drunk driver ran a stop sign. Emily never made it to the hospital. Michael survived with scars on his arms and a deeper wound no doctor could reach. Lily was only 3, too young to understand death, old enough to feel absence, too young to remember her mother's voice, and that haunted him every single day. After the funeral, the world moved on. Friends stopped calling. Family returned to their routines. But Michael remained frozen in the night that broke him. Grief became a companion he never invited but could never evict. And the louder the world grew, the quieter he became. He sold their shared dreams to pay medical bills, gave up college plans, gave up the life he imagined. Responsibility replaced grief before grief could even finish its work. And that is how sorrow hid inside duty, quietly poisoning his laughter from within at night. He still dreamed of Emily standing in the doorway, smiling like nothing ever happened. And every time he woke, the empty bed ripped the wound fresh all over again. He never allowed himself to heal properly because survival demanded speed, not softness. Sometimes he found Lily holding Emily's old scarf, whispering questions she didn't know how to shape fully. "Was Mom beautiful?" she once asked. Michael nodded with a smile that nearly shattered. And from that moment on, guilt joined grief inside his chest. He blamed himself for choosing that road that night, for being distracted, for surviving. Survivor's guilt is a quiet killer. It smiles during the day and screams in total silence at night. And Michael had learned to live with that scream as background noise. Every new beginning terrified him. Every new woman felt like betrayal. Every smile felt illegal. So he locked his heart in survival mode and buried the key beneath layers of responsibility. And that emotional prison would soon meet a storm it was never built to survive. Michael thought the worst thing that could ever happen to him already had. He believed fate had taken everything that truly mattered. But fate had been patient, and what it was preparing next would test the deepest limits of his broken heart. It started with small details Michael could not explain. A black SUV parked at the end of the street for 2 days in a row with no visible driver. The engine never turned on. The windows were dark. Nobody came out. At first, he assumed it belonged to someone new in the neighborhood, but something about the stillness of that vehicle felt wrong, like it was waiting for something to unfold. Then came the knock at his door at exactly 9:17 p.m. No one was there when he opened it. Just an empty porch, cold air, and the faint echo of footsteps disappearing into the distance. Lily asked who it was. Michael forced a smile and said it was probably a neighbor mistake. But deep inside, discomfort began to bloom. The following morning, one of his trash bags was torn open, scattered oddly across the driveway as if someone had searched through it and then tried to hide their mistake. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing made sense. Michael cleaned it in silence, feeling watched without seeing anyone. At work, his supervisor asked if everything was okay at home. Michael froze for a second, confused by the question. "You seem distracted," the man said casually. But Michael hadn't told anyone about the SUV, the knock, or the trash. The fact that someone sensed his unease made his stomach tighten. Even Lily behaved differently. She claimed someone stood across the street while she played outside after school. When Michael looked, the sidewalk was empty. "Maybe it was my imagination," she whispered. But children recognize patterns adults dismiss too easily. That night, Michael dreamed of Emily warning him to be careful. When he woke up trembling, he couldn't shake the feeling that unseen pieces were shifting around his life. And when the world begins to move quietly, danger is usually already close. By the third day, the SUV vanished without explanation. No tire tracks, no sign it had ever existed. That disappearance disturbed him more than its presence ever had. Because things that leave without answers tend to return with consequences. Michael convinced himself he was being paranoid. Stress could distort reality. Grief could invent meaning where none existed. He told himself this because admitting fear would mean admitting vulnerability. And vulnerability is dangerous when the storm has already begun to form. Still, that night, as the wind rattled his windows, Michael felt something settle over his home like an invisible shadow. And deep down, he knew these signs were only the opening whispers of a truth far darker than he could imagine. The unexpected encounter 3 days later, while unloading groceries from his trunk in the driveway, Michael heard a soft struggle behind him. A cardboard box slipped from trembling hands and burst open across the sidewalk. He turned to see a woman standing alone beside a small rental truck, clearly overwhelmed. She was in her early 30s, wearing a worn denim jacket and exhaustion in her eyes. Her hair was tied carelessly, and her shoulders sagged under invisible weight. When their eyes met, uncertainty passed between them like electricity. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to make a mess." Michael hesitated. His instincts told him to keep distance. But Lily stepped forward from the porch without fear. "Do you need help?" she asked gently. The woman's eyes softened instantly, and in that moment, choice became inevitable. The woman introduced herself as Rachel Miller. She had just moved from Omaha after a rushed separation. Her voice never shook, yet something behind her calm felt tightly controlled. Michael nodded politely, still unsure whether the stranger was crossing into his life by accident or design. He noticed her hands trembling slightly as she tried to lift another heavy box. Pride prevented her from asking again, but her body exposed her limits. Michael stood frozen between caution and compassion. And compassion won without asking permission. "I'll help you get the heavy ones at least," he said. Rachel hesitated, then nodded. "Just for a few minutes," she replied, and neither of them realized those few minutes would echo louder than years of silence. As they carried boxes together, Michael felt the strange return of something he thought he had buried: connection. Not romance, not attachment, just the quiet recognition of shared weariness. And that familiarity felt dangerous already. Rachel avoided sharing details. Every answer revealed nothing and yet suggested everything. When asked why she moved so suddenly, her eyes dimmed briefly before she changed the subject. Michael noticed but chose not to push. Silence, after all, was his native language too. By the time the last box reached her doorway, something unseen had already attached itself to Michael's life. Something heavy, something irreversible. And neither of them suspected that their paths had collided far too precisely to be coincidence. The resistance before helping after the last box was placed inside, Michael stepped back instantly, as if physical distance could erase emotional proximity. "That's all I can do," he said quickly. Rachel thanked him softly, but her eyes lingered like she wanted to say more and feared what it might cost. That entire night, Michael replayed the encounter in his mind. Something about Rachel's presence unsettled him deeply. Her calm felt trained, her fear felt controlled, and nothing about her story fit cleanly together. The warning signs were whispering again. He told himself he had already done enough. He owed nothing beyond basic decency. Getting involved in other people's chaos was a luxury he could not afford. Lily needed stability, not mystery, not danger. The following day at work, Michael found himself distracted again. A coworker joked, "You look like a man who just met trouble with pretty eyes." Michael forced a laugh but felt a chill slide down his spine. Because trouble had indeed arrived uninvited. That evening, Rachel stood at the end of his driveway again. This time without boxes, without a truck, only uncertainty. "I just needed to ask something," she said hesitantly. Michael's instincts screamed for caution. Before she could continue, Lily appeared behind him. Children see past calculation. Rachel smiled softly at her again, and Michael felt his defenses weaken. Yet something inside him still resisted the pull. "Maybe another time," Michael said politely. Rachel nodded, hiding disappointment behind composure. As she turned away, he noticed a bruise partially hidden beneath her sleeve, and that image planted doubt directly inside his chest. That night, Michael barely slept. His mind fought itself between suspicion and humanity, between fear and responsibility, between protection and avoidance, and the bruise refused to leave his thoughts. Deep down, Michael already knew the truth he did not want to face. Resistance only delays destiny, and destiny was now circling closer than he ever intended. The following morning, Michael found Rachel sitting alone on the front steps of her townhouse, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees, as if she were holding herself together by force. The bruise on her arm was more visible now, fading into dark violet and blue. For a moment, he pretended not to see her, but the weight of that image followed him like a shadow across the driveway. He tried to tell himself it was none of his business. People carried pain everywhere. Pain alone didn't mean danger, and yet his chest tightened in a way that felt personal. Lily stopped beside him and whispered, "Daddy, she looks sad," and that simple observation struck him harder than any accusation ever could. Rachel looked up as if she had sensed his hesitation tearing inside him. "I just need help with one thing," she said quietly. "No begging, no drama, just truth wrapped in exhaustion. And sometimes that is the most dangerous request of all." Michael hesitated long enough for fear to speak, then long enough for guilt to answer back. He stood between two lifelong habits, self-protection and silent sacrifice. And once again, the man who always chose responsibility felt himself losing the battle to compassion. Inside her townhouse, the air felt heavy, as if memories clung to the walls already. She asked him to help move one large cabinet she couldn't lift alone. As they shifted its weight together, Michael felt the unsettling sense that he had just crossed a line he could never uncross. During those few minutes, Rachel said almost nothing. Her silence was not shy, it was guarded. Michael noticed scars on her wrist, faint but intentional, the kind that spoke of survival rather than accident. And that realization quietly changed everything. When the cabinet finally settled into place, Rachel exhaled as if she had been holding her breath for days. She looked at Michael with something close to gratitude and something far closer to desperation. And desperation is never harmless. As he turned to leave, she asked softly, "If I needed help again someday, would you say no?" The question felt far heavier than it should have. Michael didn't answer immediately. The pause stretched between them like an unspoken contract. Finally, he nodded once. Not out of logic, not out of safety, but out of the same broken place where his kindness always lived. And at that exact moment, his future quietly took a turn he would one day regret. The first negative consequence, the very next morning, Michael's truck refused to start. The engine clicked weakly and died. At first, he assumed it was the cold. Then he noticed the thin wires beneath the hood had been cleanly cut. Not torn, not damaged by accident, cut deliberately, and that reality instantly changed everything. Running late for work, he was forced to call a coworker for a ride. His supervisor docked his pay for missing the first hour. Money he could not afford to lose vanished instantly. And as frustration built, suspicion quietly followed close behind. That afternoon, Lily came home unusually quiet. She handed him a note from school. Another parent had filed a complaint. They claimed Lily had been acting strange, and that Michael's home environment was unstable. The words felt unreal, accusatory, wrong, and yet they were now written into record. When Michael asked Lily what had happened, she shrugged with confusion. "I didn't do anything," she said softly, and the fear in her eyes told him she believed herself completely. Later that evening, he noticed the black SUV again at the edge of the street, parked exactly where it had been days before, silent, watching. The coincidence tightened into something else entirely. Michael crossed the street to Rachel's townhouse under the weight of growing unease. He asked if she had seen anything strange. Her expression changed instantly. Fear flickered, then discipline smothered it. "No," she said too quickly. That night, Michael dreamed of being chased through dark streets while Lily called for him from somewhere he couldn't reach. He woke up drenched in sweat, the echo of her voice still trapped in his ears. The smallest choices always carry the biggest shadows. Helping her had felt right, but now the consequences were beginning to speak, and they did not sound merciful. Michael stood at his bedroom window watching the street below, and for the first time in years, he whispered a prayer not for strength, but for protection. As danger slowly tightened its grip, the world begins to collapse 2 days later. Michael was pulled aside at work by Human Resources. An anonymous complaint had accused him of aggressive behavior. No evidence, no witnesses, just an accusation. And in a company already trying to cut staff, that was all it took. By lunchtime, he was formally suspended pending investigation. No pay, no timeline, no explanation. Years of quiet dedication dissolved in less than 10 minutes. And the humiliation burned hotter than fear. When he returned home early, Rachel's front door was cracked open. He knocked. No answer. Inside, the townhouse looked half-abandoned again. Boxes overturned. Silence heavy enough to press against his chest. And suddenly, the fear took shape. That evening, Child Protective Services left a message on his voicemail requesting an urgent visit. The air left his lungs. Lily played on the floor, unaware that their life was being questioned without their consent. Michael felt trapped in a collapsing maze where every exit turned into another accusation. He couldn't defend himself because he didn't understand the attack. And nothing terrifies a man more than danger with no face. That night, someone threw a rock through his window. No note, no warning, just a violent crack that shattered glass across the living room floor. Lily screamed. Michael wrapped his arms around her as his world literally broke in front of him. The police filed a report but offered no protection. Probably teens, they said. But Michael knew better. This was targeted, intentional, escalating. As he cleaned the glass with shaking hands, he saw Rachel watching from across the street, her face pale, her eyes filled with something that looked very much like guilt. And in that silent exchange between them, Michael understood that his world wasn't just collapsing. It was being pushed by forces moving far behind the scenes. The following morning, Michael walked Lily to school despite the shattered window and the storm raging inside his chest. Parents stood in small groups near the entrance, whispering in lowered voices that abruptly stopped when he approached. Their eyes followed him with judgment thinly disguised as concern. And that was the moment he realized his private nightmare had crossed into public execution. At the front desk, the school counselor asked to see him for a few minutes. The tone was polite, but the tension was unmistakable. Inside the office, Child Protective Services sat waiting. Two strangers with notebooks and cold smiles. And with a few careful words, Michael learned his fatherhood was now under review. They asked questions that sounded like accusations dressed as procedure. His finances, his work suspension, the broken window, his association with the new neighbor. Michael answered calmly, but every response dug him deeper into invisible quicksand. When Lily was brought in, she clung to his leg in fear. One of the agents knelt and asked if she felt safe at home. The word hit Michael like a blade. Safe. As if he had ever been anything but protection itself. Parents watched from the hallway as the meeting ended. Some shook their heads. Others pretended not to stare. The humiliation burned hotter than any physical pain he had ever known. And it wasn't over. By noon, rumors had spread through town like wildfire. By evening, someone had posted online, "Single father under investigation. No names, no proof, just poison dressed as concern." And the poison worked fast. At the grocery store that night, a cashier avoided his eyes. A man he barely knew muttered, "Kids deserve better." Michael paid in silence, his hands trembling as if the world itself had turned against him. Back home, he found another note taped to his door. "We know who you are." No signature. No explanation. Just a threat wrapped in certainty. And suddenly, humiliation turned into something far more dangerous. As Michael locked the door behind him and held Lily close, one truth pressed against his chest like a loaded weapon. This was no longer gossip. This was an attack, and it was only getting started. Entrance of a new mysterious character that same night. As Michael sat on the edge of his couch in exhausted silence, a knock echoed through the house. Not loud, not aggressive, controlled, calculated. When he opened the door, a tall man in a gray coat stood beneath the porch light with a calm smile that did not reach his eyes. "I'm Daniel Brooks," the man said. "I'm here about your neighbor." The words felt rehearsed, the tone too clean. Michael's instincts screamed for caution before his mind could process meaning. Daniel claimed to be a private investigator, not hired by police, not hired by CPS, hired by interested parties. The vagueness set alarms blaring inside Michael's chest. And yet the man spoke with absolute certainty. "She's not who you think she is," Daniel added, "and neither are the people looking for her." The way he said it made the street suddenly feel much darker than moments before. Michael demanded answers. Daniel offered none, only fragments. "You helped her at exactly the wrong time," he said quietly. "Or the right time, depending on how this ends." And those words carried weight far beyond explanation. Before leaving, Daniel handed Michael a business card with no logo, just a name and a number. "If your daughter is ever in danger, you call me first," he said. And that implication struck deeper than any warning could. Michael watched him disappear into the darkness, the soft hum of his engine fading too quickly. Something about that man felt different from the threats. More controlled, more intentional, and far more dangerous. When Michael turned back toward his home, Rachel stood watching from her doorway across the street, their eyes locked in silent confrontation. And in Rachel's expression, Michael saw confirmation of what Daniel had implied. Whatever storm had entered his life no longer hid behind coincidence. It had now introduced itself by name, and it was demanding attention. The confusion increases the next morning. Rachel avoided him entirely. Her townhouse remained dark long after sunrise. Michael knocked once, twice, no answer, and the silence felt deliberate. Hours later, Daniel's words replayed relentlessly in Michael's mind. "She's not who you think she is." The sentence gnawed at every memory of Rachel's quiet sadness, her bruises, her guarded eyes. And suddenly, nothing felt simple anymore. By midday, CPS returned unannounced, requesting another follow-up check. The agents were colder this time, more distant, as if the decision had already begun forming quietly behind their eyes. That afternoon, Lily told him a strange man had come to the school asking questions about Rachel. The administration denied it, but children notice what adults explain away, and that contradiction magnified the chaos. Late that evening, Michael found his mailbox stuffed with official notices, utility warnings, legal statements. One small envelope addressed only with his name contained a single typed sentence: "Leave her alone." His phone rang moments later from a blocked number. He answered. Silence answered back. Then breathing, slow, controlled, before the line disconnected abruptly, and the threat settled into his bones. Michael crossed the street again despite fear screaming for caution. Rachel finally opened the door just enough to reveal half her face. Her eyes were swollen from crying. "They're watching you now," she whispered. "I never meant for this." Before he could ask who they were, a car passed slowly behind him. Headlights swept across the street. When Michael turned back, Rachel had already shut the door, and the truth stayed locked inside with her. At that instant, Michael understood that confusion was no longer accidental. It was being engineered, and every unanswered question was tightening the trap around his family. For the first time in days, Michael received a breath of what felt like good news. His supervisor called saying the investigation at work had found no conclusive evidence yet, and that his suspension might be lifted soon. The words sounded like mercy, like a door cracking open just enough to let hope slip inside. That same afternoon, CPS informed him that Lily would remain in his custody for now. The phrase felt like a temporary pardon rather than safety. Still, he hugged his daughter with a desperation that felt like gratitude disguised as fear. Even Rachel appeared briefly at her doorway, managing a faint smile as if signaling regret without explanation. Maybe things are calming down, Michael thought naively, clinging to the first peaceful moment he had tasted in weeks. Lily laughed again that night while watching cartoons, unaware of how fragile that laughter truly was. And Michael convinced himself that the storm might finally be passing. He replaced the shattered window with borrowed money. The sound of hammering glass felt like rebuilding reality itself. For a few short hours, the world looked almost normal again. Even the black SUV failed to appear that evening. The street was quiet, still, deceptively calm. And calm after chaos can be the most dangerous silence of all. Michael slept deeper than he had in weeks. No nightmares, no distant footsteps, no trembling awakenings. And peace felt real enough to betray him. But somewhere across town, forces he could not see were already adjusting their next move with ruthless precision. Because relief is often only the inhale before the next merciless blow, and the blow was already rising. A new and even greater injustice. The very next morning, Michael's illusion collapsed instantly. 2 uniformed officers waited at his door when he opened it for work. Neighbors stood watching again. Cell phones lifted discreetly. The execution of his dignity continued publicly. He was informed of a formal restraining order filed against him by Rachel, alleging harassment and threats. The words felt detached from reality, twisted, weaponized. Michael's knees nearly gave out as he read the paperwork. The woman he had protected had now officially accused him, and the law believed her story before even hearing his. CPS immediately returned with the restraining order in hand. Lily was temporarily removed for her safety. Her screams echoed down the street as they placed her into another car. Michael collapsed on his porch, powerless, as strangers drove away with the one soul he lived for. And no defense was allowed mid-accusation. Rachel did not come outside. Not once. Her silence became a verdict. By sunset, his bank account was frozen pending legal review. Rent bounced. Utilities entered shutdown status. And his survival thread began unraveling violently. Daniel's business card burned in his pocket. But pride froze his hand before fear could guide him. And with Lily taken, finances strangled and reputation destroyed, Michael realized the injustice had only escalated to its cruelest form. The protagonist loses almost everything that night. Michael sat alone in his dark living room surrounded by boxes he could no longer afford to unpack. Echoes replaced laughter. Silence replaced purpose. And loneliness became physical weight. His phone buzzed with voicemails he couldn't bring himself to play. Lawyers demanding retainers he could not pay. Social workers explaining protocol. Threats hidden beneath polite vocabulary. The electricity cut off shortly after midnight. The hum of life vanished. Darkness swallowed his home completely. And in that darkness, the smallest memories burned the brightest. He found Lily's drawing on the refrigerator. Stick figures of them holding hands under a sun too bright for reality. And his knees finally touched the floor in silence. The following day, eviction notices arrived. The house he fought for was no longer his battlefield. It was lost territory. Across the street, Rachel's townhouse stood empty. Curtains removed. Doors locked. She was gone without a trace. Michael finally dialed Daniel's number with shaking hands. It rang twice, then voicemail, and despair swallowed the last of his resistance. With no money, no child, no job, no reputation, and no answers, Michael walked the streets of Cedar Rapids like a ghost nobody saw but everyone judged. And for the first time since Emily died, Michael stared into the void and wondered if this time he truly had nothing left to lose. Michael sat on the cold front steps of the house that was no longer his in spirit, staring at the empty street where Lily used to ride her bicycle. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was predatory. Every sound felt like mockery. Every passing car felt like a reminder that his life was still moving forward without waiting for him. He hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days. Hunger lost its meaning when despair became the dominant sensation in his chest. His phone lay dead beside him. No power, no messages, no purpose. He felt erased, like a man already buried, still breathing out of habit. At night, he whispered apologies to the dark for failing his daughter. He apologized for not being stronger, for not being smarter, for trusting the wrong person. And the darkness answered with silence that cut deeper than any scream. There was a river on the edge of town. More than once, as he wandered with no destination, Michael found himself standing on its bank, watching the water move endlessly without caring who watched it. And for the first time in his life, the thought crossed his mind that maybe disappearing would finally stop the pain. The memory of Lily's last scream from the CPS car paralyzed him. Her voice haunted every step, every breath, and that guilt weighed heavier than death itself. He entered an abandoned bus stop and slept curled on a bench beneath flickering lights. Wind cut through his jacket. Cold seeped into his bones. And yet he felt nothing. Emotional numbness is surrender disguised as calm. In his dreams, Emily stood on the riverbank shaking her head. Not in anger, in disappointment, and that quiet look tore him apart more violently than words ever could. He woke up sobbing in public for the first time in decades. Passers-by glanced briefly and moved on. And in that moment, he truly believed the world had finished with him completely. Michael closed his eyes and whispered to the emptiness, "I don't know how to fight anymore." Believing surrender had finally won, but fate was not done with him yet. A small gesture rekindles hope the following morning. Michael awoke to the touch of a small hand shaking his arm. A homeless man stood in front of him, holding a paper cup of coffee. "You looked colder than I've felt in years," the man said gently. And that simple act cut through Michael's emptiness like unexpected light. They sat together in silence, 2 broken lives sharing heat against the morning frost. The man introduced himself as Harold, a former construction worker who lost everything to medical bills. "You still got fight in your eyes," Harold said quietly. "You just forgot how to use it." Michael almost laughed at the irony. The idea of fight felt foreign now. But something in Harold's certainty unsettled his despair. Before leaving, Harold pressed 20 crumpled dollars into Michael's hand. "It ain't charity," he said. "It's a loan to your comeback." And those words carried more weight than all the empty promises Michael had heard in weeks. That afternoon, using that money, Michael bought a prepaid phone and charged it at a gas station. The screen lit up for the first time in days. Missed calls flooded in, but one name flashed brighter than all the rest: Daniel Brooks. Michael hesitated for nearly an hour before returning the call. Fear still ruled his hesitation, but hope, fragile and trembling, was finally breathing again. Daniel answered immediately. "I was beginning to think you'd given up," he said. His tone was calm, but urgency hid beneath it. And suddenly, Michael felt seen again. They agreed to meet that night near the old railroad bridge outside town. Neutral ground, empty ground, dangerous ground, and choice returned to Michael's life again. As he walked toward the meeting place under fading daylight, Michael realized that one small act of kindness, this time given to him, had pulled him back from the edge, but the battle ahead would be far more brutal. A strange piece of information appears. Daniel arrived exactly at 9 p.m., his car headlights cutting through the mist beneath the bridge. He stepped out slowly, scanning the darkness before approaching Michael like a man trained never to be surprised twice. Without wasting time, Daniel revealed something that shattered everything Michael believed. Rachel Miller was not her real name. The woman had been living under at least 3 identities across 2 different states. Daniel slid a folder across the hood of his car. Inside were photographs, documents, aliases, restraining orders, and police reports that painted a woman constantly running but never escaping something far worse behind her. "She's connected to a financial crimes network," Daniel said quietly. "Corporate theft, identity laundering, shell companies." The words sounded cinematic, unreal, and yet the proof sat coldly in paper form before Michael's eyes. Michael's hands trembled as realization struck. Everything that destroyed his life had been engineered through proximity, not coincidence. Daniel explained that the accusation against Michael had been pre-written. All it took was her signature to trigger automatic legal protocol designed to remove obstacles quickly. "Obstacles like you," Daniel said bluntly, and the truth dropped like steel into Michael's chest. Rachel hadn't framed him out of fear alone. She had been ordered to remove him from the equation entirely. And someone with immense power was pulling the strings. As the fog thickened beneath the bridge, Michael realized the nightmare was no longer personal. It was criminal, and far more dangerous than he ever imagined. As Michael walked away from the bridge that night, the fog no longer felt natural, felt staged. Every shadow seemed positioned with purpose. Daniel's words echoed in his head with terrifying clarity. None of this had been random. The truck, the timing, the accusations, Lily's removal. Every move had followed a script written long before Michael ever carried a single box. He replayed the exact moment Rachel dropped that first box on the sidewalk. The hesitation in her eyes. The way Lily stepped forward at the exact wrong moment. The way compassion had overridden instinct. It no longer felt like coincidence. It felt engineered. Michael began to see patterns where chaos once lived. The black SUV. The trash searched. The knock at 9:17 p.m. The CPS call arriving only hours after his suspension. Every step lined up too perfectly with the next to belong to chance. Even Lily's school complaint now felt planted. Designed to build a narrative slowly and quietly before the real strike came. And when the strike hit, the system was already leaning in the attacker's favor. Daniel had warned him that financial crimes networks operated through long preparation phases. They studied behavior. They mapped emotional triggers. They observed who could be manipulated and who could be sacrificed. And Michael realized with dread that he had been marked as both. The deeper he dug into his memories, the clearer it became. Rachel hadn't chosen his house because it was convenient. She had chosen it because Lily existed. Because Michael was vulnerable. Because a single father with a quiet life leaves almost no resistance when attacked from the shadows. That realization cracked something open inside him. The rage that had been drowned by despair suddenly found oxygen. And when rage breathes again, transformation begins quietly but violently. Michael no longer asked, "Why me?" He began asking, "Who ordered this?" And that question shifted the entire battlefield from emotional survival to strategic war. For the first time since everything collapsed, Michael understood one terrifying truth. He had not wandered into disaster accidentally. He had been selected, and now the hunt was fully revealed. The mistake that makes everything worse against Daniel's explicit warning to stay invisible, Michael made a choice born from desperation and paternal instinct. He drove to the CPS building unannounced, believing that if he just explained everything face to face, truth would overpower manipulation. It was a mistake that would cost him far more than silence ever could. Inside the sterile waiting room, Michael waited for nearly an hour before being escorted into a cold, windowless office. 2 officials sat across from him with unreadable expressions. The moment he mentioned Rachel's aliases, their posture changed instantly. They accused him of accessing classified information, demanded to know his source. Michael suddenly realized too late that Daniel's investigation had never been meant for legal exposure. Not yet. His attempt at transparency only deepened their suspicion. Instead of weakening the accusations against him, he had unknowingly strengthened the narrative that he was unstable, obsessive, and dangerous. When he left the building, 2 unmarked vehicles followed him for 6 full blocks. He recognized the surveillance immediately. The network had felt him move, and it did not approve. Minutes later, Daniel called him with anger he could no longer hide. "I told you not to surface," he said coldly. "Now they know you're not broken yet." And that single sentence carried a weight heavier than any shout ever could. By nightfall, the restraining order escalated into formal charges for continued violation through third-party communication. The legal trap tightened, and Michael had walked directly into it. His bank accounts were officially seized this time. Not frozen, seized. And with that, the last illusion of safety vanished entirely. As Michael sat alone in his car watching patrol lights reflect off nearby storefronts, he finally understood the brutal truth. One wrong move against a hidden enemy can turn survival into a countdown. The betrayal or the great lie. 2 nights later, Michael received a text message from an unknown number. Just 3 words: "We need to talk." The signature beneath froze his blood instantly. Rachel. Daniel warned him it could be a setup. But Michael's need for answers outweighed fear. They agreed to meet at a closed diner on the outskirts of Cedar Rapids, a place with cracked windows and dead security cameras. Rachel arrived late, her face hidden beneath a hood. The moment she sat down across from him, Michael saw exhaustion carved deeply into her expression. Not guilt, not rage, something colder. She admitted that she had signed the restraining order, admitted that the accusations were fabricated, admitted that everything had been ordered. And then she delivered the lie wrapped inside the truth. She claimed she had been forced, that men had threatened her life, that she had no choice. Tears filled her eyes as she spoke. And for one fragile moment, Michael almost believed her again. Then she revealed the final condition of her cooperation. She had agreed to testify against Michael in exchange for complete immunity and relocation. In a single breath, betrayal became permanent. Not a reaction, not a mistake, a calculated trade. Michael's life exchanged for her protection. Rachel stood to leave and whispered, "Your daughter will be fine as long as you stop fighting." And with that sentence, she shattered whatever illusion of remorse still existed. As she disappeared into the darkness, Michael remained frozen at the table, realizing that the woman he once tried to save had just delivered the deadliest lie of all. Hope weaponized against him. The diner closed behind Michael like a coffin lid. Outside, the Iowa night felt hollow, the air too still, as if even the wind had abandoned him. He sat in his truck for nearly an hour without moving, staring through the windshield with eyes that no longer blinked normally. For the first time, the weight crushed him all at once. Not piece by piece, not in waves. It collapsed in a single violent impact. Rachel's betrayal, Lily's absence, the charges, the shadows following him, and something inside his chest finally fractured. He drove without direction until streetlights thinned into endless farmland and darkness swallowed the road. When the engine died of empty tank, he didn't even feel urgency. He felt absence. Sitting on the hood beneath a sky filled with indifferent stars, Michael broke in total silence. No sobs, no screams, just tears falling without resistance, like the body finally surrendering to gravity. He replayed Lily's laugh in his mind until it became unbearable. Her morning questions, her small hand reaching for his, then nothing, just air where a child once existed beside him. For hours, he argued with God, with fate, with every invisible force that dared allow innocence to be traded like collateral. And with every unanswered question, his spirit shrank further at dawn. A passing farmer stopped and gave him fuel without questions. That kindness nearly destroyed what little strength he had left. Because when cruelty teaches you your worth is zero, even mercy feels like an accusation. Back at his empty house, Michael collapsed on Lily's bed and curled into a position his daughter once needed from nightmares. Only this time, there would be no comforting voice to wake him. That night, Michael did not sleep. He stared at the ceiling, realizing that when a man loses his child, even time becomes hostile. The disappearing friend's news spreads faster than truth. By the end of the week, half of Michael's town had already chosen what version of his story they would believe. And most of those versions did not include innocents. Friends who once crowded his porch now crossed the street to avoid eye contact. Messages went unanswered. Invitations silently disappeared. Even family gatherings became doors that never opened again. At the grocery store, whispers followed him between aisles. A mother pulled her son closer as Michael passed. The judgment needed no words. It had already been decided. His old co-worker Ben tried to defend him publicly. 2 days later, Ben was fired without explanation. And after that, no one spoke Michael's name out loud anymore. The loneliness that followed was not sudden. It was surgical. Each connection severed cleanly, one by one, until only isolation remained intact. Even the neighbor who used to leave fresh bread at his door for Lily stopped coming by. And that silence hurt worse than confrontation ever could. Michael stopped checking his phone. Because watching the message count remain at 0 felt like watching a heartbeat slowly flatline. At night, he started identifying every creak in the house as an enemy preparing to enter. Paranoia grew quietly when companionship vanished loudly. And as the town erased him socially, the system tightened him legally, until existence itself began to feel unauthorized. The day he almost gave up 3 weeks after losing Lily, Michael drove to the edge of a limestone quarry just outside Dubuque. The cliffs dropped clean and unforgiving into water so dark it reflected nothing back. He stood there for a long time with the wind pressing into his chest like hands trying to push him forward. And for the first time, surrender felt peaceful instead of frightening. He whispered apologies into the air, for failing as a father, for believing in the wrong woman, for surviving when Lily needed protection. In his pocket, his phone vibrated. Once, then again. He ignored it, because hope had become too painful to risk feeling anymore. When the vibration didn't stop, irritation overcame despair. He pulled the phone out, ready to silence it. But the name on the screen shattered his stillness instantly. Daniel? Daniel's voice came fast and urgent. They moved Lily this morning, he said. New location, different state, and I finally know why. Those words grabbed Michael by the spine and ripped him away from the edge of the abyss. Daniel explained that Lily hadn't been taken for protection. She had been taken as leverage, insurance, a living lock to keep Michael compliant while the network completed its final operation. Michael dropped to his knees in the gravel, not in despair but in fury reborn. A rage so focused it felt surgical. As the quarry wind howled behind him, Michael stood back up, realizing that death had missed its chance, because the fight was no longer about survival. It was now about retrieval. After stepping back from the quarry, Michael didn't return to his house immediately. He drove aimlessly through rural Iowa for hours, letting the anger settle into something colder and more precise. Rage had nearly killed him. But now, something else was taking shape inside him, something quieter and far more dangerous. Instead of collapsing, he began observing. He wrote everything down in a small notebook he found in his glove compartment. Dates, vehicles, faces, times. The black SUV. The courthouse transfer. The way certain officers avoided his eyes. Patterns began to whisper where chaos once screamed. He stopped begging the system for mercy and started watching it instead. From outside the CPS building. From across the street of the police department. From shadows that previously terrified him. And fear slowly began changing sides. Michael sold his wedding ring at a pawn shop in Des Moines, the last physical piece of his past. With that money, he bought prepaid phones, notebooks, a small camera, and gas. Preparation replaced desperation silently. At night, instead of crying, he researched court procedures, foster transfer regulations, private adoption loopholes, shell companies, nonprofits, and the deeper he dug, the uglier the connections became. He began sleeping in his truck willingly now, not as punishment, but as camouflage. Remaining unseen meant remaining alive, and invisibility became his new form of armor. Even his reflection changed. The man in the mirror no longer begged for answers. He waited for mistakes, and powerful people always make mistakes. For the first time since Lily was taken, Michael didn't feel like prey. He felt like gravity quietly recalibrating itself around those who thought they were untouchable. And somewhere deep inside, a dangerous certainty formed. This story was no longer about what he had lost. It was about what he was about to take back. A new, unexpected ally. 3 nights later, Michael felt the shift before he saw it. The same black SUV circled the motel parking lot twice instead of once. That was the first deviation from pattern. And deviations always meant opportunity. A woman stepped out of the vehicle, not Rachel. She wore a navy blazer, walked with military control, and scanned the area with professional indifference. Not law enforcement. Something more deliberate. She lowered her sunglasses just long enough for their eyes to meet. And in that moment, Michael understood something chilling. She didn't see him as a suspect. She saw him as a variable. 20 minutes later, his burner phone rang. A number he didn't recognize. He hesitated once, then answered. The woman's voice was calm, surgical. "If you want your daughter back," she said, "you need to leave your truck and walk east." Then the line went dead. Every instinct screamed trap. But instinct had also saved him at the quarry. He obeyed. 3 blocks later, an unmarked sedan rolled slowly beside him. The rear door opened without stopping. He got in without being touched. Inside the car, the woman introduced herself only as Grace. No last name, no credentials. But she knew everything: Emily's death, Rachel's arrival, the restraining order, the frozen accounts, the foster transfer. Details nobody should know. Grace revealed that she worked for a private federal oversight unit that specialized in human trafficking masked as child protection operations. And Michael's case had triggered several red flags at once. But then came the sentence that twisted hope into agony. "We can't move legally yet. If we do, they disappear with the children forever." Rescue had limits, and limits could kill. As the car slowed to release him back into the dark, Grace turned and said one last thing. "You're not alone anymore, Michael. But from this moment forward, your life won't belong to you." And the real war finally began. The truth begins to leak within 48 hours of meeting Grace. The leaks began. A silent article appeared on a regional Iowa legal blog describing procedural violations inside CPS transfers. No names. No accusations. Just questions planted like seeds of doubt. A second post followed from a Missouri watchdog journalist about shell nonprofits moving foster children across state lines without finalized court orders. Again, no names, but enough clues to make officials nervous. Behind the scenes, Grace fed Michael verified documents and fragments. Not everything, never too much. Bank routing numbers, pseudonyms, meeting locations, and every detail pulled another thread loose. Michael learned that Rachel had never been evicted. Her financial crisis was staged. The move was operational relocation, and he had been selected in advance as the perfect disposable asset. He discovered that Lily's transfer had not been logged in the federal foster database. She had become untraceable on paper the moment she crossed state lines. And that is how children vanished without anyone screaming. For the first time, his suffering had a structure, a design, an architecture built on legal camouflage and psychological destruction. And knowing that made the pain sharper, but also meaningful. One night, Grace sent a single message. "She's not your enemy. She's not your ally either. Rachel is a controlled piece on someone else's board." That sentence shattered the last illusion Michael still carried. Another message followed minutes later. "Your daughter is alive, physically safe, but the window is closing." And the clock suddenly became louder than his heartbeat. As truths bled slowly into visibility, Michael understood something terrifying. This operation wasn't ending with Lily, it was only beginning through her. Grace sent the file at exactly 2:11 a.m. The subject line read only, "Emily Carter, reopened." Michael stared at the screen for several seconds before touching it, as if opening the document might resurrect a pain he had spent years burying under daily survival. The file revealed that Emily's car accident had never been officially closed as purely accidental. A secondary investigation had once been opened and quietly buried after 3 key witnesses changed their statements within the same week. Michael felt his chest tighten as he read the names. One of those witnesses now worked inside the same CPS division that had signed Lily's emergency removal order. Coincidence collapsed into design instantly. Another name on the list belonged to a real estate developer connected through shell companies to the nonprofit that handled interstate foster transfers. The web was no longer invisible. It was tightening. Grace confirmed what Michael feared most. Emily had unknowingly overheard something she shouldn't have at a fundraising event years earlier, and less than 2 weeks later, she was dead on a road with no cameras. Michael realized in horror that Lily was never just leverage. She was a continuation of unfinished business. A loose end tied to a woman who had stopped being silent too late. Every memory of Emily suddenly rearranged itself under a different light. Her distracted silences. Her sudden insistence on backups of documents. Her whispered comment days before her death. "If anything happens to me, don't trust the paperwork." Michael's grief mutated into clarity. This wasn't only about getting Lily back anymore. This was about finishing what Emily had died trying to expose. And as the truth about his past solidified, Michael understood that the danger ahead wasn't growing randomly. It had always been waiting for him to remember. The protagonist is tested once again. The test came disguised as mercy. Grace contacted him just before sunrise. A back-channel judge inside Nebraska's juvenile system could fast-track Lily's return, but only if Michael agreed to sign a full waiver of civil liability. The message was clear without being spoken. Take your daughter and walk away, or pursue justice and risk losing her forever if the operation failed. Michael sat in his truck for hours, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles blanched. Every instinct screamed to grab Lily and disappear, to choose fatherhood over war. Grace warned him that if he chose the individual rescue route, the entire trafficking network would survive untouched, free to replace Lily with hundreds of others who had no one searching for them. Michael imagined Lily's face when he first found her again. But then his mind filled with faceless children whose names would never be screamed into the night by desperate parents. The judge's deadline was noon. If he didn't sign, the offer vanished permanently. Silence became a weapon pointed at his chest. At 11:58 a.m., Grace called again. "Whatever you choose," she said, "you will live with forever." And forever suddenly felt terrifyingly short. Michael closed his eyes and saw Emily's face, not as it appeared at the end, but as it looked when she still believed the world could be corrected if someone dared to confront it. And in that suspended moment between personal salvation and collective justice, Michael realized the cost of doing the right thing had never been higher. He chooses to do the right thing again at exactly 11:59 a.m. Michael sent one message to Grace: "I'm not walking away." The words carried no hesitation, just finality. The judge's offer evaporated instantly. Lily remained property of the system for now, and Michael felt his heart split open a second time. By choice this time. Grace responded with a single sentence. Then the operation moves into extraction phase, and that single sentence shifted the direction of every life connected to this case. Michael knew from that moment forward that there was no return to anonymity. No more hiding in trucks. No more watching from shadows. He was stepping directly into the machinery now. His role changed overnight. Instead of observing, he became bait. Instead of running, he would draw their attention deliberately. Grace explained the next phase required visibility, controlled exposure, strategic pressure, and Michael would be placed where those responsible couldn't ignore him anymore. The irony cut deep. His destruction was about to become his weapon. His reputation, his case, his public disgrace would now be used to dismantle the very structure that shattered him. That night, Michael looked at Lily's drawing one last time before folding it carefully into his jacket. Not as a reminder of what he lost, but as proof of what he refused to abandon. And as he stepped into the darkness behind the motel, Michael no longer walked like a hunted man. He walked like the opening move of a storm that would soon become impossible to contain. Michael's first reward came in the most unexpected form. Not money, not freedom, but a photograph. Grace sent it just after midnight. A blurry image taken through a surveillance lens. Lily sitting at a small table, coloring with 2 other children. Alive, breathing, real. His hands shook so violently that the phone nearly slipped from his grip. Tears fell freely, not from despair this time, but from a pain reversed by proof of existence. For weeks, Lily had lived only as an idea. Now, she was flesh again. Grace confirmed the location. A private transitional care facility outside Omaha, disguised as a rehabilitation center funded by one of the shell nonprofits Michael had helped expose. The chessboard had finally revealed a king. But there was a catch. The extraction window would only last 11 minutes before automatic federal overrides triggered an internal lockdown. 11 minutes to undo weeks of coordinated control. Michael offered himself immediately. Not as backup, not as witness, as leverage. Grace refused at first, then hesitated, then finally said the sentence he needed. You may be the only reason they hesitate, and hesitation could save lives. That night, Michael didn't sleep. He rehearsed Lily's face in his mind over and over so that fear wouldn't erase it when danger arrived. And danger always arrived early, at dawn. Unmarked vehicles rolled across Nebraska farmland under low fog. No sirens, no valles. Just breath held across a moving battlefield that the public would never know existed. Michael waited in a separate vehicle. Wired, monitored, visible. If the enemy panicked, the children disappeared. If they hesitated, the exit opened. He had become the balance point. And as he watched the facility doors through a digital feed, Michael felt the impossible becoming fragile reality for the first time since Lily was taken. The partial financial reversal of the extraction succeeded, but quietly. No news helicopters, no sirens in the distance, just the silent transfer of 6 children into secured federal protection. Lily among them, breathing, shaking. Alive, Grace met Michael 2 hours later at a hospital outside Council Bluffs. Lily was sedated for shock but stable. When Michael touched her hand, she whispered, "Daddy," and the world rebooted around that word. But the operation didn't end with rescue. It triggered seizures, 12 shell accounts frozen, 3 properties confiscated, and buried money began surfacing where shadows once lived. Because Michael's identity had been used illegally to move assets under false allegations, restitution protocols activated automatically. Money returned to his name, not as charity but as correction within 72 hours. His frozen accounts unlocked with funds far exceeding what he ever owned before. Enough to rebuild slowly, carefully, without chains. Grace warned him it wasn't a settlement, not a victory, just the first fracture in a structure still resisting collapse. And structures always crushed those beneath them before they fell. Michael paid his debts, reclaimed his home, but he kept living modestly, because wealth gained by accident often disappears on purpose. The town that once erased him now watched cautiously as his name returned to public records. Not charged, but cleared, and as the dust shifted slightly in his favor, Michael knew this reversal was only the shadow of a much larger truth preparing to surface. The revelation of who the mysterious woman really was weeks later. Grace finally met Michael openly. No burners, no disguises, no moving vehicles. A quiet cafe near the Missouri River. The war had cooled enough for truth to breathe. She placed an envelope on the table. Inside, credentials from the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Inspector General, the unit that investigates corruption inside the system when the system refuses to self-correct. Grace wasn't just an agent. She had a personal history buried inside the same structure. Her younger sister had vanished in foster transfer 20 years earlier. Declared lost in relocation. Never found. Michael realized then that this fight wasn't coincidence for either of them. It was convergence. Pain finding pain inside a machine built on silence. Grace revealed that Emily's fundraising event years earlier had been the first exposure of the network. Emily had recognized the pattern, followed the money, and made the mistake of speaking too close to powerful ears. Rachel, it turned out, had been recruited later, not as mastermind but as a controlled asset. A woman with debt, fear, and a child of her own placed directly into malevolent leverage. She helped you move because part of her wanted out, Grace admitted. But fear always obeys power. And Michael finally understood the trembling in Rachel's voice that last day. Rachel had been relocated under witness protection 3 days after Lily's extraction. Alive, broken, no longer a weapon, but never a hero either. And with every secret finally stripped of disguise, Michael realized the mysterious woman who changed his fate was never sent to save him. She had been sent to finish what Emily started. Closed emotional ending with victory and justice 6 months later. Michael and Lily stood at the edge of a small lake outside Cedar Rapids. The same place they once picnicked before life learned how to collapse. Only now, The silence no longer felt predatory. Lily still woke from nightmares sometimes, still asked where the bad building went. Trauma doesn't vanish, it learns to speak softer. And Michael learned to listen without fear. The federal case expanded quietly. Indictments followed invisibly. Judges resigned. Executives vanished into courtrooms without cameras. Justice moved without noise, but with permanence. Michael was offered compensation, public recognition, a chance to profit from exposure. He refused it all, because some battles aren't fought to be remembered. They're fought to be finished. Instead, he rebuilt his life one ordinary day at a time. School lunches, homework at the kitchen table, quiet laughter that healed more than therapy ever could. Emily's name was publicly cleared, her accident reclassified under federal investigation, and the world finally stopped calling her death random. One evening, Lily asked him, "Daddy, if I get scared again, will you find me?" And Michael answered with the only truth that mattered. "There is nowhere on earth you could go that I wouldn't reach." And he meant it. Grace sent one last message. The network is dismantled, but others exist. Stay vigilant. And Michael understood that survival had become responsibility. As the sun vanished behind the lake and Lily leaned against his shoulder, Michael realized that injustice had taken everything from him once and given back something stronger. Purpose forged in fire, sealed in love, and proven by sacrifice,